Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dario Health. Manage your blood glucose levels, increase your possibilities. By Gvoke Hypopen, the first premixed auto-injector for very low blood sugar. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, all about Afrezza. How much do you really know about the inhalable insulin? I had a great conversation with the people who make it.
For me, it's about using the right product that meets your needs to get you in control. And if you're doing well, great. You're going to avoid the long-term complications. But if you're not, you own your health. And you got to really try to find the best set of tools that are going to make you successful and fit in your lifestyle.
That's MannKind CEO Mike Castagna. We talk about how Afrezza works, misconceptions, the worldwide market, pediatric studies, and lots more. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. We aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And this week we're talking about the use of the only inhalable insulin. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2. He is 16. My husband has type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes at all, but I have a background in broadcasting, and that is how you get the podcast. I have to say that personally, my family is very interested in Afrezza. Benny really would like to try this. Of course, as I mentioned in that tease up there, they are looking at pediatrics. He is still under 18, so it's not approved for his age group. But we are watching it really closely. And I have a lot of friends, a lot of bloggers and people in the diabetes community have talked about this for years. And some things have changed. So I wanted to have them on the show and find out more. So a little bit of background for you. If you are brand new to all this, Afrezza was approved in the United States in 2014. And the company that makes it is MannKind. For a while, it was sold by Sanofi, but then MannKind took it back. It's one of those things where sometimes the business side seems to have gotten more attention than the product itself. So what is Afrezza? It is a powder. It comes in cartridges, and you suck it and you inhale it with a special inhaler device. To me, it looks more like a whistle than a traditional inhaler, like an asthma inhaler. It's not like a big tube. I'll link up some photos in the show notes. I'll also link up the Afrezza website so you can learn more and see their information. And my guest this week is Dr. Mike Castagna, the CEO of MannKind. Now, he has a doctorate of pharmacy. He worked as a pharmacist behind the counter for CVS at the start of his career. But then he went back to school and he got an MBA from the Wharton School of Business. He's fun to talk to. He doesn't mince words, and he truly believes in this product. I do have to tell you that Mike mentions monomeric insulin a couple of times. I'm going to come back after the interview and explain more about that, give you a better definition. All you really need to know is that it's faster than how liquid insulin is made. And all of that in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dario. And over the years, I find we manage diabetes better when we're thinking less about all the stuff of diabetes tasks. That's why I love partnering with people who take the load off on things like ordering supplies, so I can really focus on Benny. The Dario Diabetes Success Plan is all about you. All the strips and lancets you need delivered to your door, one-on-one coaching so you can meet your milestones, weekly insights into your trends with suggestions on how to succeed. Get the diabetes management plan that works with you and for you. Dario's published studies demonstrate high-impact clinical results. Find out more. Go to mydario.com/diabetes connections. Mike, thanks for joining me. I'm really excited to catch up and learn. I'm stuttering because I can't believe this is the first time we're talking to you, but thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Before we jump in and start talking about Afrezza, can you give us some perspective, kind of dial back, because MannKind it's not a name that came out of nowhere. There's really important history. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit first?
Sure. MannKind comes from our founder named Alfred Mann, and Al Mann was a true innovator. He started, 17 companies. And everything from, the cochlear implant to the pacemaker to insulin pumps that many of us know today as Medtronic used to be called Minimed. And Al Mann built the insulin pumps over the 80s and 90s and was very successful and sold that company to Medtronic. And then he took literally $1 billion of his own money and invested in MannKind. And he had put this company together through 3 companies he owned. The technology to make Afrezza was really a combination of companies. And the reason he was so dedicated is he saw in the pump market, which we now see today on CGM, was that the variability in mealtime control was so high and the fluctuations you see, that the insulin just takes about an hour and a half to kick in. And it's hard to get real-time control if you can't get a faster-acting insulin. And so he set out to make a real-time acting insulin. So Afrezza is inhaled. It's monomeric, and that was really what the magic was in our technology making a dry powder was freeze drying. If you heard of Dippin' Dots ice cream, we have basically a large Dippin' Dot machine in our factory, but we freeze dry the particles to make Afrezza, and they're stabilized in monomeric form. So when you're inhaling insulin that as soon as it's in your blood is active. Or when you inject, it's called hexamer, and it has to break down over about 45 minutes, and that's how you can make it stabilized in injectable form. But it has to break down, and then it starts working. And that's why there's always this lag effect between what you see in injectable insulin and inhaled. So they're very different products. We're categorized as mealtime rapid acting, but the name MannKind comes from Al Mann, and the guy who probably 60% of people on pumps today are on pumps that he created. So an amazing gentleman, huge contributions to diabetes, and millions of people are alive today because of his work and his generosity. And we're hoping to take that forward here in kids and Afrezza and inhaled insulin.
I may never look at Dippin' Dots the same again.
I see a large factory with it. I'm like, we can always make Dippin' Dots if things don't go well. So.
I love it. Let me ask you to go into a little bit more detail about how someone who uses Afrezza would actually use it. Can you talk a little bit about like a daily routine?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know you're in this disease. I mean, people sometimes graze all day and they just kind of ride their sugars and take a little bit of insulin along the way or mini boluses. And some people, eat once or twice a day, or some people, carb restrict, and everyone has a different way. And I think that, the big difference with Afrezza patients that I see is it's in the moment, meaning you don't have to time your meal and your insulin when you're going to take it, where you're going to be. As soon as your food arrives, you take your first dose. Most people I know who use Afrezza take a long-acting insulin with it. Is that pretty standard for people with type 1? Yeah, on type 1, you're right. You need a basal insulin of some sort, and a mealtime is inhaled. We do have some patients on pumps where they will use their pump just for their basal, for example, and use Afrezza for mealtime corrections. So, the average patient is very different. We have some patients that are type 2s, not on any basal. You'll need to be on basal for it if you're type 2. But if you're type 1, you need a long-acting insulin, and you need your mealtime. And we know the biggest problem in this country is still mealtime control. It's the number one thing people living with diabetes struggle with. And it's a big reason why, 6 or 7 or 8 out of people, 8 out of 10 people basically are not a goal on insulin because of the mealtime control. It's a daily challenge for everybody. Can you talk a little bit about how Afrezza is kind of measured out? Because when we think of mealtime insulin, everybody thinks about carb ratios, and especially as you mentioned, if you're on an insulin pump, you're putting in the carbs that you eat. So how does that work? Yeah, it's funny. I get into many debates with people because, I'm a pharmacist by training, but I'm not the smartest guy. But I couldn't do all these, what people do every day with insulin sensitivity ratios and carb counting and timing. And all I can tell you is everyone's math is off by 50%, one direction or another. And so we have this false pretense that we're that accurate in dosing our insulin by down to the half unit or 1 unit. And the reality is your angle of injection can decrease, change your absorption by 25%. Your site of injection could change your absorption. Your stress level can change your impact of your insulin. There's so many things that go into your daily dosing of insulin that, being that precise down to the unit is not as accurate as we all think. And I think that's one of the misnomers of, the timing is what you really struggle with when you're using injectable insulin is you just don't know what's going to happen. When people, I ask doctors often, you don't have to carb count with Afrezza, and they give me funny looks. And the reality is, we've never done a study where you're carb counting to get to your dose of insulin. That's, so it comes in 4, 8, and 12. You can dose linear all the way up to 48 units. It's additive. And you just got to be close enough. And so it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. There's no direct pulmonary equivalent to injectable insulin, unfortunately. But, if people are taking 5 units of injectable insulin per meal, they're going to need about 8 units of Afrezza, and maybe even 12. And you're going to figure that out after your first meal or two, what the right dose is for you. But you just got to be close enough. And that's a big misunderstanding for people of how accurate the dose has to be. And is the fixed dose cartridge is a big problem. I know plenty of type 1 patients who take 4, 8, 12, 24 meal, especially if they're having Chinese food or sushi. They dose a lot. So I think that's something people have to get comfortable with because it's so dramatically different than anything they've ever been trained or taught in their history of living with diabetes. I would assume that a prescription for Afrezza comes with a doctor's visit where someone, whether it's someone who works for Afrezza or the endocrinologist, talks to you about how to do this dosing. You said you figure it out, but I've got to assume that you're not just sending people home with this inhalable and say, just test it.
I mean, right? Somebody's going to figure out a ratio.
And I think that's the key thing is, having patients understand, because it's odorless and tasteless. So you inhale and you're like, well, did I get it? And I'm like, yeah, if you inhaled in a half a second, it's in your blood, it's in your lungs. It's breath activated. So you can't really, of course you can try to mess up something, but we have something called Blue Hail where we can show a proper inhalation technique in the office on an iPhone app or an Android. And so, we hope that patients are being trained either by our trainers or the doctor's offices and what proper inhalation technique looks like. That's number one. And then number two is the right dosing. And as you know, individualized dosing is important in insulin. And again, it's not that. That's why I say we take a lot of the math out, because it's either going to be a 4 or an 8. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm going to take an 8 units. It's a lot. It's really not when you're taking inhalation units versus injectable units. And that's what people got to get comfortable with after their first or second dose. So they really do figure out this meal did this, or pizza's going to take longer, so I'll take another dose in an hour. But people do figure it out pretty much within the first week. And there's one thing actually I want to mention, because I often forget this, is because injectable insulin has such a long tail, it's in your body for 4 to 6 hours before it's out. And that feeds into your basal rate, your long acting. And so when people switch over Afrezza, it's pretty much out of your body in roughly an hour and a half. Sometimes people need to adjust their basal, and that's something to watch out for if you do switch to Afrezza and you're struggling with some of the basal rates. Some patients, I hear people anecdotally, we know one study, they had to bump up their basal 10-15% on Lantus. And I've heard patients on Tresiba, because it does have that long tail, bump down their insulin sometimes on their basal. So there are those other metrics patients have to watch out for when they are switching to the product. It's not just mealtime, it's also some of that basal rate you got to look at.
I have a question, and I apologize because it's a bit ridiculous. I'm going to ask it anyway. Right back to the interview in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke Hypopen. And our endo always told us that if you use insulin, you need to have emergency glucagon on hand as well. Low blood sugars are one thing. We're usually able to treat those with fast-acting glucose tabs or juice. But a very low blood sugar can be very frightening, which is why I'm so glad there's a different option for emergency glucagon. It's Gvoke Hypopen. Gvoke Hypopen is premixed and ready to go with no visible needle. You pull off the red cap, push the yellow end onto bare skin, and hold it for 5 seconds. That's it. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Now back to my interview with Mike, where I will ask that ridiculous question. You had mentioned it's tasteless, odorless. I recall hearing, and I'll have to fact check this, but I recall hearing that years ago, dandruff shampoo, they had to add like that tingly feeling because people didn't think it was working. Like it's totally fake, but people just didn't believe it was a medicated shampoo because it didn't have an unpleasant sensation. Have you thought or talked at all about adding like a flavor or a feeling so people really know that they got it? Or is that just really bananas?
Did somebody in my company come and talk to you ahead of time? There is somebody internally who wants us to look at like cherry flavored Afrezza, especially as we go into pediatrics. And the answer is, look, there's blueberry metformin because the metformin smells awful and tastes awful probably. So, those things are possible. We've never done them, to my knowledge, in this industry with dry powders. It is a question that came up recently, is that should we be thinking about a cherry flavor Afrezza or some other flavor? And I think the answer is TBD. I don't know what the data is on inhaling the food coloring dye or whatever goes into these flavors.
Yeah, good point.
But that's some of the stuff we'd have to justify that it's safe and effective. And I don't know what the FDA would want us to test, but it did come up recently in another internal discussion. And since you're asking, I think we'll look at it. Even if maybe there's a way to even show a placebo that's a cherry flavor or something, right? A one-time dose to see what it's like. So I don't know, but but people, like I said, it's sometimes you get a cough, like when you take Afrezza, 1 out of 4 people will get a cough initially, and generally over the first 4 weeks that cough goes away in 97% of the people. So I always tell people, if you're having a cough, like as long as it's not interrupting your life, it should slowly get to your first refill, and it should be mostly resolved by then. Your body's getting used to putting a powder in your lungs. But that's when people ask me what's the difference between injectable and inhaled in terms of safety, you're putting a dry powder in for the first time in your body, and your body gets used to that. And that's the number one thing that's the difference. Where injectable insulin, you have other things you're dealing with, injection sites and pump sites and scarring tissue and things like that.
Does the body actually acclimate to the powder, or is it just a question of someone gets better and used to the inhalation sensation?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have a black and white answer on that one.
Kind of splitting hairs.
The body's getting, my guess is the body's getting used to putting a dry powder in and just expects it, and you get used to, like you can drink a glass of water before and after and help minimize it. But it's generally like that's what it feels like. It's not a productive cough or anything. It's not a cough that happens 10 minutes later. It usually happens right after you inhale.
You mentioned blue hail. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so blue hail is two different things. The first one that we're looking at is with the patient training device. So we can show you whether you had a good inhalation or not a good inhalation and show you that technique. The second version actually can detect what dose you put in the cartridge in the inhaler. So it has a proprietary software there that we can see what cartridge you put in through the adapter. And it'll tell you on your app if you took a 4, 8, 12, or 16, however much you took in that session. And then we hope to integrate that with the CGM data. So now you can show dose response curves on CGM one day. And eventually I want to get into AI and predictive analytics, but we're not there yet. But we think that's the magic of what people really want, which is one that I used to think when you live with diabetes, you just must remember and be that perfect to know exactly what dose you took, what time you took it, what meal you were. And then I simulated being a patient for a week, and I realized I couldn't remember if I took a 4 or an 8. Did I take it at 6 or 6:20? Is that 30 minutes or 1 hour? Like it was amazing when you just think about life, and people are human. They're human. So they're not keeping track and they're not that accurate, and they're just estimating. And that's when I talk about the dosing of insulin. Like we're always estimating everything. We're estimating the time our food's going to come, how long it's going to work, what the carbs are, how much am I going to eat or drink. Like it's all accurate. It's all off. It's not that accurate. That to me is the thing I realized when I was thinking when someone does a disease, you think they're perfect. They're not. They're human beings. And that's when I see 1 out of 5 doses of injectable insulin are intentionally missed. And the predominant one that's missed is actually lunchtime, which makes sense. People are out in a social environment. They don't want to inject. And by the time they get back, they either forget or it's probably too late, right? You're already high.
What do you mean by intentionally missed? You mean like people just forget?
No, they intentionally knew they should take a dose of insulin, but they're in a lunch conversation, or they forgot their insulin in the office, or they don't have their CGM receiver on them. Like they intentionally don't. They miss 1 out of 5 doses. So if you're missing 20% of your doses, it's really hard to get in control. And there's all kinds of reasons, but that's intentional omission versus unintentional, which is I forgot.
I'm curious what the source is on that. I don't doubt it. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can find it.
We can follow up on that.
I have your email. I'll look for it. Yeah, no, because I didn't believe it. And then there was a study done with one of the pens coming out that has the digital connectivity. And I looked at it and I looked at the data. I'm like, wait, if a person ate 3 times a day, 7 days a week, that's at least 21 doses, right? And I think the average person was taking like 12 shots a week. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. But you realize, again, we're human. So people aren't always as compliant as we want, or they don't eat 3 times a day perfectly, or if they eat 2 big meals, who knows? Everyone does something different. So having insulin that meets your needs and your lifestyle, I think is really important in the world. And, look, we like our product. Obviously, we're here. We love Afrezza. But I also for me, it's about using the right product that meets your needs to get you in control. And if you're doing well, great. You're going to avoid the long-term complications. But if you're not, you own your health, and you got to really try to find the best set of tools that are going to make you successful and fit in your lifestyle. And obviously we're not doing well when 80% of people on insulin aren't a goal. I mean, that to me is the number one thing I look at in this country and say, wow, despite all the adoption of pumps and technology and CGM, we still have not made a meaningful difference in percent of people to goal. And that's frustrating.
Way back at the beginning of this interview, you talked about Chinese food and pizza. And I'm just curious, these are things that are hard to dose for because they come later. Most people listening are very familiar with, and I think probably have their own system for dosing, whether it's an extended bolus or injecting more than once. How would you do something like that on Afrezza? Is it a question of you would take what you think when you're eating and then again in a bit later? Like, how do you account for those high-fat foods?
Yeah, I'm going to pick on Anthony Hightower, who I know you interviewed before. So I actually met Anthony on a bet over social media. And he had shown me his sugars where he ate pizza. So I'll pick on him because I know it's a public discussion here.
Sure.
He ate pizza, and his sugars are basically flat over the 2-3 hours post-meal. And I said, I'm like shocked. He's like, this is something people cannot do naturally on their history of injectable insulin. They always struggle. And when you eat pizza, you're going to be struggling not just for hours, but potentially for the next day because it just throws everything off. I think in his case, right, I watched him. He took a big dose up front. Let's say he was going to take 12 units of injectable. He took 24 units of Afrezza, and then he watched where he was in an hour. And then in an hour, if he was above where he started, he took another dose. Maybe he took a 4 and 8 just to tap it off. And then an hour later, just saw if it was still high or not, right? But you can almost keep your sugars in that kind of control. That's one of the studies we did back in 2018 called the STAT study, was showing that you could dose as soon as 1 hour with no more hypo risk. And that was a big concern of people. How can I dose it in 1 hour? Well, that pretty much hit its peak effect in 1 hour. So if your sugars are still moving in the wrong direction, you can correct them at that point. And so that's where someone on pizza or Chinese food, like, yeah, it's a high dose up front and they manage it through the whole system. Or they may see an hour or two later, they're still high and they take another dose, but they can bring it down at some point.
All right, let's talk about the big questions that people generally have. And that the one I hear the most is it safe, right? Is it okay to inhale this stuff into my lungs? Can you talk about the studies that you've done?
Yeah, I think if we were able to make inhaled insulin 100 years ago, we'd be scratching our heads as who would inject themselves 3 times a day. So I think it's just unfortunately a matter of 100 years of difference. But we studied Afrezza probably in over 3,000 patients, 70-some trials, $3 billion over 20 years. Like, that's how much money, time, and energy is going in to prove the safety and effectiveness of this product. And, and I tell people, there is no data to say that it's not safe. We have all the rodent studies, all the CT scans of the lungs, looking for fibrosis, looking for pulmonary issues. We've found nothing. So it doesn't sit in the lungs. There's an old product called Exubera on the market years ago. And Exubera was a sugar-based mannitol formulation, which got absorbed over time in your lungs. In Afrezza's case, it's got water and human insulin. So when we ask about what ingredients are you worried about, the human insulin is human insulin. It's E. coli based, but it's human insulin characteristic. And water is purified, so we know that's safe. And the only other carrier in our product is FDKP, which is an excreted product that is not metabolized in the body. It just gets 100% excreted. So, there's 3 ingredients in our product. One is human insulin, one is water, and one is FDKP. And FDKP comes out of the system. So I don't think the body's afraid of human insulin and water. So I think, I always struggle with this topic because, what happened is there were some lung cancer cases in the Exubera data. There was a couple in our data. But, in the 7 years since FDA approval, we've seen no safety signals come up in the post-marketing. We have probably almost 10,000 patients on Afrezza today. I know people on the drug for 10, 12 years. And so, we don't see anything that gives us concern. And we're going into kids now who would have to take the drug for 40, 50, 60 years. So I think it's hard to prove something that you've never seen. But safety comes with time. And I think the good news is this product has been approved by the FDA for 7 years now. And we've not seen any safety signals in our database, which we look every year. Our REMS program ended early by the FDA, and we've continued to show good data in all the studies we've done. We've not seen anything new come up in any of our safety issues. So if you the populations, I would say if you have COPD and asthma, this is not the right drug for you.
So wait, dumb question though. If you have diabetes and you smoke, can you get an Afrezza prescription?
We would say you should not. It's we have a warning for that.
Well, I just wanted to be clear that there was an actual warning. It wasn't just a please don't because it's bad for PR.
Yeah, please don't. No, it's a warning. No, we don't want people smoking on our product.
Tell me about the study with kids because I've got one. I've got a 16-year-old who is quite interested in this product.
Yeah, no, I just found out, unfortunately, the other day I got a 3-year-old cousin in the family who just came down with type 1. And so she'll be 4, and our study's going to go down to 4 years old to 17 years old when we launch it. So I'm excited. We had to do a study to show that the pharmacokinetics and dynamics of inhaled insulin are similar in kids as it is adults. And so once that study was complete, we wrote a protocol down to the FDA and said we'd like to go into the next phase and now run a larger study head-to-head against the standard of care. And the FDA has pretty much signed off on that protocol at this point, and we have contracted with a third party to now run that trial. And we'll be having our investigator meeting here in next month. And so hopefully we'll see our first patient in the 4 to 17-year-old range, probably here in September, October timeframe. So super excited. A long time to get here. It took too long from my perspective, but can't wait to help kids. But our founder, Al Mann, invested. He became very wealthy when he sold the insulin pump company. And he took $1 billion of his own money and made Afrezza inhaled insulin because he felt the problem with the injectable subcutaneous delivered insulin was it just took too long to work. And something that has an hour lag effect from food that's real timing, it's always hard to catch those two even. And so he really wanted to make an inhaled insulin that really mimicked that physiologic insulin that you see in the body. And he felt the only way he could get there was through a dry powder lung-delivered instantaneous insulin. You could also get there through an implantable pump, but that didn't work out when they tried that back in the 90s, I recall. So people got infections and things like that, so that didn't work. So really, we're going to get in my mind, a physiologic insulin that's going to be monomeric, stabilized. it's probably going to happen only through the inhaled route. So we have to get comfortable with this from a overall efficacy and safety. Otherwise, you're not going to really ever get this control that people are looking for real time.
Now, he lived long enough to see Afrezza approved, didn't he?
He saw it approved, and unfortunately, I'm here because he died on my daughter's birthday. So I was debating whether to come to MannKind or not, and I'm very superstitious, and now man picked the day he died, and he died February 25th, 2016, and I then made my decision to join and help save the company and save Afrezza and keep it on the market, because I think, I saw all these wonderful patient stories online, and I said, these patients, like Anthony Hightower is one of them, they did something that no one else did. They did something we never did in our clinical trials. And so I got to talk to them, and I realized we just didn't dose it properly. So when you go back to the development of the product, a lot of the challenges were underdosing because everybody's trying to compare it one-to-one to injectable insulin. And therefore, we wind up underdosing patients, and therefore they got equal outcomes. They didn't do any worse than injectable insulin per se, but could they have gotten better outcomes if we dosed them properly, right? And I think that's the data we're now trying to generate to show that in the kids study now, be head-to-head, or if you dose it properly, what happens, right? And that's what we're really focused on right now.
Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked about?
No, we're only available in the U.S. We're in the process of going to Europe, so I don't know if you have any
Yeah, we do.
So a lot of times, I know we have patients on a named patient basis in Germany and UK and Italy. So, their governments actually import Afrezza and pay for it. We're in the middle of filing for Australia. We're approved in Brazil, and we're going to India. So you'll see this more and more around the world if you have listeners in those markets. But it's not going to happen this year. And hopefully late next year, early the following year in some of these markets, we'll be looking at bringing it to more patients in those markets.
Well, and just got a big approval here in the United States for Medicare patients, right?
Yeah, so that one, we get a lot of questions on that one. And so, as you know, this market, CGM patients were told you need to be injecting yourself, I think, 4 times a day, or you couldn't get your CGM. So then doctors were not giving patients Afrezza. And so we were able to ask CMS to change that, and they did. It took a year, but I'd rather have it done than not done. And so, here we are a year later that policy is now being updated, and I want to thank CMS and all the people that helped make that happen. And I think it helped even people in CGM, because I understand they removed some of the other requirements to get CGM even in injectable-based patients. So, but little old MannKind was the one who started that process, and then we were able to help a lot more people. So that's great. And we're trying to get Medicare $35 a month insulin. So, if you have Medicare listeners, and, we're trying to make sure we help get patients access that are on Medicare. I think that's important. So,
how does it stack up in terms of cost in the United States?
Yeah, unfortunately, the billion-dollar debacle in this country is drug pricing, as we all know. And as a pharmacist, I know firsthand what people go through and how many meds they're on and how many copays they're on. And so we really have tried hard to make sure that no patients pay no more than $15. So we have copay card programs. We actually have a free drug program. So if you really can't afford it, we'll give it to you for free. If you're going through the prior authorization process, we give it to you for free while you're going through that. So we don't want payers and reimbursement to be an excuse of why a patient can't get access to our product. We think that people will do well on our product. We're willing to take that bet that they'll see good results. And if they see good results, the payers will usually pay for it. As you may or may not know, that there's a monopoly in diabetes between 2 insulin players and 3 payers who are all working together to make sure there's no competition. That's unfortunate, but they pay to make sure that patients have a difficult time getting Afrezza. And that's always one of my frustrations of competition or this disease is, for 100 years, we've seen the price. I used to dispense insulin at $20 a vial in 95, and now that same vial is hundreds of dollars. For me on the payer side, we want to make sure patients, we try to bring it down to about $15 on commercial. And Medicare, they generally pay comparable to what they would. And some Medicare plans are a little bit higher. I can't, that's a hit or miss when you go to submit for reimbursement. But we try to do everything we can to make sure people have access to our product.
$15 for?
$15 for commercial patients?
No. But what is it for? What do you get for $15? Is it a month? Is it a
month?
Week?
Yeah, whatever. You gave 2 boxes, 3 boxes, whatever's on that prescription for that month.
For the month. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. No, I was going to say I forgot. We actually have a cash pay program, and if people are paying cash for their insulin, we do see several thousand people a month paying cash for injectable insulin. We have insulinsavings.com where it's $99 a month for Afrezza. And, if you need a bigger box or more doses, you might pay $199. But we try to make the cash price, roughly $100 a month if you had no insurance, for example.
I'm not sure you can answer this question, but I will ask it anyway. Is the biggest challenge for you all the failure of Exubera? Is it just people not knowing what this is? As you move forward, what is the big challenge to get more people to adopt this?
I mean, for me, the biggest challenge are the doctors. We created a program where we basically gave it for free to patients for 2 years for $15, like no prior auth, nothing. We just charge you $15. And that didn't change a lot of doctors from jumping on board. And doctors just don't know our data. And so they think this product doesn't have a lot of data behind it, and they don't know our data. They don't know, like when I ask a doctor how fast from the time you inject or bolus your pump to the time you look on a CGM that your sugars are coming down. And I get, these are endocrinologists. I'll get 5 minutes, immediate, and 20 minutes, an hour. The answer is 90 minutes to 120 minutes. That's the answer. And so they don't even know the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, the differences between injectable insulin and inhaled. And then you have doctors, calling some of these ultra-acting drugs faster. Well, look at the package inserts. They're no faster than their old products. And there's a lot of misperceptions out there, some of these newer launches of ultra-acting insulin. And to me, they're really not that much different than their predecessor. And look at the data. There's not a dramatically faster onset or offset or, A1C lowering or weight gain. It's all very much the same. So, I think it's just a matter of doctors trying to really understand the data.
Before I let you go, are there any plans in the future to change anything about the way it looks or different colors? I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly when you're just trying to get people to adopt the new technology, but from a user standpoint, and look, I know you've heard all the jokes that my friends who use this will make. You can't comment on this, I know, so don't say anything. They'll make comments like, taking a hit or whatever, right? I mean, it's inhaling. It's this little thing that you're inhaling. It looks a certain way. I'm curious if the cosmetics of it are anything that are on your radar or needs to be improved even.
No, I mean, I think when you spend, $3 billion in 20 years doing a new drug development or taking a 100-year-old product and reinventing it, you had to get that right in terms of device design and airflow dynamics and consistency of dose. And I think all that's really important because there's, misperception that, oh my God, it's going to be more variable than injectable insulin. And the data just doesn't support that statement. And so for us, we have one of the world's most unique inhalation platforms across the entire pharmaceutical industry. We deliver more powder to the lung than most technologies out there. So that's why you can get consistency dose to dose. And you don't have a lot of variabilities because our technology and our device, it's called a low velocity inhaler. What that means is there's a resistor that helps slow the powders as they're coming out of the inhaler so they get deep into the lungs, and that's why you get that nice absorption curves that we see. And where most inhalers are high velocity inhalers, so it's just about sucking air as hard as you can and hoping you get, 20, 30% of the drug into your lungs. And most of it gets stuck in your teeth, the device in the back of your throat. That's most dry powder inhaler technologies out there today. And so that's something unique to us and our technology and our device, and that they all work really well together. You couldn't just take our powder and put it into another inhaler and it would work just as well. It would not work. So, we're pretty happy with the device. We are going into other diseases. So, we're going down to the FDA with our partner for an approval in October for our pulmonary hypertension patients. And we have several other orphan lung areas we're going into to help more patients with lung disorders. So, I think that's important. Like our technology, our inhaler, our platform is going to be used in more and more patients over the next decade than just diabetes.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because if it works so well, will you partner with other medications? That's great to hear.
Yeah. We're really busy. We probably have, 10 to 12 formulations of products we're working on this year and 5 of our own products in the pipeline. And so it's a really good time at MannKind. We're super excited to be here. And it was a turnaround. The company struggled for many, many years, and we're on our way to success. And I think Afrezza, you'll be hearing more about it. So I know it's been a long time, and maybe you didn't talk to us yet, but hopefully you'll talk to us more and more as we continue to generate new data and more and more patients start using it.
I'd love to, especially with the kids programs. And like I said, I've got a 16-year-old who is very curious about this. And, once safe and effective, once we get all that safety stuff in here, his mom says, I'll definitely, I would like to check it out. So I really appreciate you coming on and spending so much time with me and my listeners and explaining all of this. And we'll definitely talk again. Thanks, Mike.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
More information at diabetes-connections.com, always on the episode homepage. I also have a transcription as well. Sometimes those podcast players don't display the show notes and the links. So if you have any trouble, just go back to diabetes-connections.com. And I want to say that I did reach out to have Mike or somebody from Afrezza on the show. As you heard him say, it'd been a while. It just took a while to connect to the right person. Let's just say that. And I will have them back on because lots of good stuff is happening, as you heard. I want to take a second and kind of explain monomeric insulin. And, I'll be honest with you, the scientific points here are really not my strong suit. I'm a communications major, right? So I did what I always do. And I asked people who know a lot more than I do to help me explain it. I went to the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. And, I said, how do you explain monomeric insulin? I know it's faster. And Tim Street, who is just wonderful and runs the Diabettech.com page, that's like diabetes tech, Diabettech, and I'll link that up as well. He provided this explanation, which really brought it home for me. And boy, I hope I'm pronouncing everything correctly. So Tim wrote, insulin naturally links its chains together to form stable molecules. Typically, it connects 2 together and then links 3 of those 2 chains together, additionally to create 6. This is highly stable and described as hexameric. In order to use these chains, you have to break the molecules apart to single chains, which are monomers. Typically, fast-acting insulins are stored as dimers, 2 monomers connected, which are easier to split than hexamers. By storing the insulin as a single chain, a monomer, the body doesn't have to break the chains to instantly use the insulin molecule it receives, and that is why Afrezza wraps the monomeric form in the capsules to make it ultra-fast. Thank you, Tim. That actually made a lot of sense. I got to tell you, we have the smartest people and the kindest people in this Facebook group. If you're not there yet and you want to join, come on in. I highly recommend it. You don't have to be a Tim Street. You don't have to be able to explain these concepts. You do have to be nice, and you do have to not post a lot of drama. I'm very tough on my diabetes groups. I run 2 of them. They're very nice and friendly places for a reason. But Tim, seriously, thank you so much. That was a great explanation, and I really appreciate it. All right, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. If you're a veteran, the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitoring system is now available at VA pharmacies in the United States. Qualified veterans with type 1 and type 2 diabetes may be covered. Picking up your Dexcom supplies at the pharmacy may save you a lot of time, too. Connect with your doctor for more info. Dexcom even has a discussion guide you can bring with you. Get that guide and find out more about eligibility. It's all at dexcom.com/veterans, and all the information is always at diabetes-connections.com. Before I let you go, just a quick note about back to school. I have never done less. I packed up a bag for Benny to bring to the nurse. He brings his daily supplies with him every day in his backpack. But of course, like most people, our nurse has backup supplies for him. So I put those together. He brought them in along with our plan, our orders, from our endo. And that was it. I haven't set foot in the building. I'm not sure when I will go in or if I will go in. Probably when he forgets something or they run out there. But I've never done less work. I did a lot of work over the years to go to school and meet with people, and he's got it. So not much to report. It feels very strange. All right, please join me this Wednesday when we have our In the News live on Facebook every Wednesday at 4:30. And then we turn that into a podcast episode. I love doing that. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you're enjoying it. Give me your news tips. If you've got any from this week, just email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. Thanks as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Simms. I'll see you back here in a couple of days. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.